Hello, ladies. Welcome to week 8 of our Gospel of Mark study. This week, we will be looking at chapter 4, verses 35 through all of chapter 5. And this week, I want to make sure that you've read the passage before we start. Okay, so if you haven't read it, take a break and do that now. But I want us to focus on these 4 sections here in the passage and really look at desperation. You see a lot of desperation and fear and how Jesus interacts with that. So that's what we'll focus on in this time that we have together. So the broader context where we've been, Jesus very recently called the 12 to himself as his disciples by name just recently. And he's been teaching, casting out demons, healing, doing all of his public ministry things. And then also recently proclaimed, I am the Son of Man, right? As far as context for this particular day, Jesus has been teaching all day long. Okay, he's been teaching to multitudes. He's been teaching in parables. And after that, he's been explaining these things to his disciples. Now, I don't know if you all have taught all day and then tutored afterwards, but it's exhausting. And Jesus is tired. And he tells his disciples to get in the boat and they're going to go over to the other side. And they do. And so Jesus climbs into the boat, goes to sleep. He's exhausted. He needs some rest. So he sleeps. And the disciples start rowing across the lake. But as they do, a storm starts. And we see that the fierce gale of wind came up in verse 37, and waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Luke tells us in chapter 8, verse 23, again, a fierce gale of wind descended upon the lake, and they began to be swamped and to be in danger. Now, we want to remember that 4 of these disciples are fishermen. They're used to boats, they're used to lakes, and they're probably quite accustomed to being stuck in a storm. So these are not men who easily fear in a boat in a storm. But they are afraid. They are in danger and they think they're going to die. And in their desperation, I'm sure they were shoveling buckets or handfuls of water out of the boat, but they realize this isn't going to do it. So they go to Jesus and they say to him in verse 38, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And it just hurts my heart to hear them say, "Do you not care?" They've been with Jesus all this time, and they've heard his speaking, and they've known his compassion for the multitudes, for the hurting, for them. And yet in this moment of desperation, they forget that, and they say, "Do you not care that we're perishing?" Jesus gets up, calms the storm, stops the wind, the waves, and Mark says it became perfectly calm. That word perfectly in Greek is megas. Mega. It was mega calm, right? Not like, oh, they're kind of still bouncing or it was a little windy and rough. No, perfectly calm with just his word. Well, Jesus calls the disciples out here in verse 40, and he says to them, "Why are you so timid? How is it that you have no faith?" And this is when the disciples are afraid. Mark tells us they became very much afraid. Very much is megas. So the sea is perfectly calm. But the disciples are mega afraid. An interesting contrast right there. They say to each other, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" With all of the things they've seen Jesus do, this terrifies them. This display of power over the elements, over wind, which you can't grab and touch and control over the waves, scares them. But also, I think they're mega afraid because he sees their lack of faith, and they're frightened that he knows, and that he's revealed that to them, that they really do lack faith. Well, as they go across the land, little extra aside, in verse 36, we were told that other boats were with him. And I just wonder, what were they doing during this storm? I wonder how they responded to the storm, and what did they think when everything just perfectly calm? We don't know. Mark doesn't tell us, but you can think about that one for fun. They come across the lake and they get onto the other side, and they find a demoniac. This man was in such a sad state. It really just makes me want to cry. He was alone, living in the tombs, just death all around him. He would cry out because of pain. He was gashing himself. People from the town had tried to subdue him, but he could not be subdued. They'd even tried to shackle him. He just broke those in pieces. He was living a very tortured existence, physically, but also spiritually, as he's been possessed by demons. When Jesus comes up, he is desperate for physical healing, for spiritual healing. He's desperate for freedom from these spiritual chains, if you will. And he runs up to Jesus and bows down before him. And the demons cry out, "What do I have to do with you, Jesus, Son of God, Son of the Most High God?" They know who he is. He's the Son of God, the Most High God, and he is the Son, and they are afraid of him. They don't really want to be cast out, but they definitely don't want to be just left alone. So they ask, "Please let us go into the swine." Jesus asks them before he casts them out, "What is your name?" And they say, "My name is Legion, for we are many." A legion is about 5,000 Roman army soldiers. That's a lot. Now, he doesn't say precisely we are legion because we're 5,000. He says many, so it may have just been an exaggeration to prove a point. There were 2,000 swine, and Jesus does cast the demons into the 2,000 swine. So is it possible that there were 2,000 demons in this man? I don't know, but a lot of demons. And Jesus does cast them into the swine, and immediately the swine go running over a cliff to their death. And it shows us that not only were these demons desperate to kind of do what they wanted, but they were desperate for destruction, for death. They had been tormenting this man and enjoying it. And they now, as they're going to have to leave this man, they want to be doing more destruction. Well, the herdsmen freak out. Okay, they see their livelihoods literally going over a cliff and die. So they run into town to tell the townspeople what's happened. The townspeople come running, and we're told in verse 15, they came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed, sitting down, clothed, and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were frightened. Notice this is when they're frightened. They're frightened when they see this man who had been possessed by this crazy demon, powerful demon, whom they could not control, sitting there perfectly calm in his right mind. And they see their swine dead over the cliff. The demons that had been so powerful that they could not control it had destroyed all of their swine, and they realize Jesus is more powerful than all of that. And they're afraid. And instead of bowing down in worship, instead of saying, "Wow, by what authority do you do these things?" they say, "Get out. Go away. We don't want to see you. We don't want you in our town. It's a sad, sad state. The man, however, wants to be with Jesus. He knows the power of God. He knows that this is the Son of the Most High God, and he wants to follow. But Jesus says, go home. Go home to your people. Right? Be reconciled to your people. Go to Decapolis and tell everybody about me. Tell them all what I have done for you. Evangelize. Be my evangelist. Well, it seems like Jesus went across the lake just to help the demoniac be healed, because he goes right back across. And as he crosses the lake and lands, we are going to have two stories kind of melt together and interrupt each other. As he lands, in verse 21, he's met by a multitude, right? They must have seen him coming, and they're like, he's back, and they want a piece of it. Well, one person in particular, Jairus, the synagogue official, comes to see him. It is interesting that he was a synagogue official. Remember, Jesus has been in lots of synagogues. He loves to teach on the Sabbath, and it never seems to go well from the officials' perspectives. Yet this man has seen and heard Jesus, and he believes in his power. He knows that Jesus is the one who can help me in my desperation. He is desperate because his 12-year-old daughter is on the brink of death. He's desperate for her healing. So he goes to Jesus, and in verse 22 at the end and 23, we see he falls at Jesus' feet and entreats him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her that she may get well and live. Jairus knows that Jesus can heal his daughter with just a touch. Jesus says, all right, let's go. And they're going. But remember, there's a multitude around them, so it's kind of chaotic, and they're trying to go to Jairus' house. And on the way, is a woman, right? Woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. As long as Jairus' daughter has been alive, this woman has been bleeding. The pain and discomfort and inconvenience of what's been happening in her life is overwhelming. I think of the physical pain. I think of the inconvenience of having to wash rags all the time. We have feminine hygiene products for which we're so grateful and we don't even think about, but she had to wash rags all the time. The pain of losing family and community life. This must have been very devastating. Luke 15:19 through 33 talks about the kind of the laws around menstruation. And we're told, this is a little nutshell of it, whoever touches her shall be unclean until evening. She's been bleeding for 12 years. It's probably been a very long time since she's been touched. Whoever touches her bed must wash and will be unclean till evening. Whoever sits where she has sat will need to wash and will be unclean until evening. Anyone who has sex with her, he will be unclean for 7 days, and so will his bed. This woman has been outside of comfort and community, probably even outside of family. It would be very difficult to live in this home where you can't sit where she sat and you can't touch her bed and you can't touch her. So hard. And she is desperate for healing, but she's confident that Jesus can do it. She knows, right? If I can just touch his garments, I will get well. And a little aside, the tassels that hung down on the edges of the Jewish men's cloaks were called wings. And in Malachi 4:2, there's a beautiful reference to this. And I don't know that she was thinking of this, but maybe. But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings. I don't know if that's where she touched. if that's what she was thinking. But she reaches out and touches his cloak, and immediately she stops bleeding. And she knows she stopped bleeding. She's very aware. It's over. It's done. He's healed me. But Jesus also knows that she's healed. He knows power's gone out from him, and he says, who did it? And now she's again afraid of the crowd. She was afraid of the crowd at the beginning when she was unclean and bleeding because she didn't want to be yelled at. She didn't want to touch them and make them unclean. And now she's probably afraid that the crowd will seize her, that Jesus might undo this healing. And she's afraid again, but she's in her strength, says, it was me. It was me. And Jesus sees her faith. Oh, verse 34, ladies. Daughter, Jesus says to her, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Oh, there's so much in there, right? This inclusion he brings back, daughter, family, loved. He sees her faith and he acknowledges it. He says, go in peace. I don't know that she'd experienced peace for a while in her life. Be healed of your affliction. This word affliction can mean plague or scourging. This was a difficult time in her life, and Jesus acknowledges it and says, you are healed from it. Oh, peace that she felt. And we almost forget that Jairus is waiting, that his daughter is ill, until right when this is over and someone comes up and says, Jairus, your daughter's died. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Oh my, what sorrow, what fear. And Jesus just turns to Jairus in verse 36 and says, do not be afraid any longer, only believe. And ladies, there's a cure for fear in that. Believe in Jesus. That is the cure for fear, for our desperation. Don't look at the storm like the 12 disciples did. Don't look at the swine that are dead on the side of the hill like the townspeople did. Don't look at the crowd like the bleeding woman did. Look at me. Believe in me. I will save you. And they go. And now there weren't very many people in the room when this happened, but Peter, James, John, Jairus and his wife, the little girl, and Jesus, they go in. Jesus raises her from the dead. And not surprisingly, they were completely astounded. One can only imagine, right? Completely astounded. And he tells them to not tell anybody. I think you can figure out why he wouldn't want people to know this as far as crowds go. But he also, I love this little touch of humanity that he throws in here. And he just says, something should be given to her to eat. Such a human thing, such a natural part of life. We need to feed her. Let's focus on this child who has life again. Okay. So ladies, when you are desperate, when you are afraid, run to Jesus. Believe in Jesus. Believe in him. Believe in his words. Have faith in him. Rejoice in him. And then, like the man who had been freed from a legion of demons, tell everybody.